Maree, your latest book, Worthy, is all about how to stop mauling our mojo. Now, I found that such an interesting concept that as women, we tend to maul our mojo. So, can you please explain for our listeners, our viewers, what exactly do you mean by that?
Ness, what a great question. What I mean by that phrase is that it's time for us to stop the negative narratives that we carry in our minds. And, this is not generically about women. I've met lots of people across all genders who do this. However, I think it's fair to say, and the research backs me up internationally, that women are renowned for mauling their mojo. So, what I'm talking about here is the comparisons that we make with other people, whether they be our closest friends, members of our family, people we've never met before that we might see on social media, the internal narrative that we start from very early in life around, I'm not enough of. Insert your choice of word here. So for me, it's so important that we reframe that, change it, stop it as much as possible. We're humans. It's impossible to turn it off entirely. And occasionally it can serve us very, very well. So it's about knowing when to channel that energy in a way that is useful and when to turn it off because it's not helpful.
When is it useful?
I think comparison is really useful when we use it to set goals for ourselves. So I think, the negativity is never particularly useful. But I think those of us who self-criticize can use that as an insight into what's going on here. What am I actually striving for? What is it that I'm thinking about that is making me frame this as a negative? So it's a little bit like the old Buddhist philosophy of inviting the inner critic to come to tea. Open the door, welcome them in, sit down together. What is this? What is it that you'd like to tell me? And if it's all about criticism, then off you go. You've had your cup of tea, now you can leave. But if it's got some particular useful insight, there's a hint for me here, I can grow from that. So I think sometimes this stuff is really helpful for us.
I really love that analogy. Sorry, I was on mute just then. I love the analogy of inviting it in for a cup of tea because it reminds me of this whole thing around so many other aspects of our life, like fear. If we try to push it away, it just gets bigger, it gets louder, it gets rowdier. The inner critic is the same. We talk a lot with this in the work that we do with clients. If we completely ignore it, it's like that little kid that's tugging on your pant leg or your skirt leg and it gets louder. But if you stop everything and give it all the attention every time it speaks to you, you're creating a little monster. You're over-validating it. And so it's not about a push. It's about, there's a sense of, even though we can never truly control, the one thing we can control is our mindset, our thoughts, our feelings, which is damn hard sometimes. There is a sense of you're getting control back in this space. It's almost like it's on your terms, and the curiosity perhaps helps some of those negative or emotionally charged feelings and thoughts. Even in the process itself, I feel like that's going to help move through some of these emotions and things that are holding us back.
I love what you said about it being on your terms, because that's exactly right. Like coming back to Nessa's first question around mauling our mojo, it really is about re-establishing on our terms, how do I want to talk to myself? What's useful here? And this is, there's we've all read those books with the naff suggestions of getting up in the morning and looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, I love you. Like, how much does that want to make you put your fingers down your throat? Is it just me? But there is something very affirming about saying today is going to be on my terms. A whole lot of stuff might go wrong, but a whole lot of things will go right. And I'm ace. Like, I've got this. And it's not about faking it till you make it. It is actually believing today is not the first time that I've got out of bed and done these things. I'm well practiced. I'm well versed. I've got these skills. I've done all these things in life already. My mojo is pretty good. So this might be a new experience, but I've done many of the things that are similar to this, and I'll be okay. You know, it's what is the worst thing that can happen? I'll fail. Okay. And that will be a learning experience. I know that sounds so cliched, but it bloody works.
Yep.
Yeah. I think the biggest barrier sometimes is actually remembering this stuff in the moment. You know, actually it can make sense. And sometimes it's hard in the moment. That's why it's the work that we do, and that reframe and focusing on not what hasn't been done, but what has been done, or the successes, not just the failures, you know, all of that. So do you have any tips and tricks up your sleeves? How do we keep this top of mind so that when we're in the moment, we remember to do the reframes, to ask ourselves these questions?
I reckon my top tip would be to stop for a moment and breathe. Now that's a good cure for everything, by the way. But I reckon in the moment, it's because we're processing so quickly. It's because we're moving so fast, and our brains are often in hyperdrive at this point. And so the reminder would be to stop, notice, what is my body doing? Take a breath, take 3. Okay, what do I need to do now for a bit of self-calming? I think it's that moment of remembering, okay, yes, I've got some tools and tricks. I know what to do here. I want to give you an example that might be useful for your listeners. I have a terrible fear of public speaking, which most people would have no idea about.
Wow.
I'm often a podcast guest. I deliver webinars online. I can get up and present in front of thousands of people. I MC conferences, but inside, I am like that 3-year-old going, "Mummy, stop it now." And I've had to practice. I've had to really overcome that fear, as so many people do. And I remember having to give a presentation some years back, and I was saying to my EA, Lacey, I'm so nervous. And she said, "Tell me what the nerves are about." I said, "Because I've never done anything like this before." And she roared laughing, and she said, "I beg your pardon? How many speeches have you given in your career? Please don't tell me you've never done anything like this before." "Yes, but today is about blah." She's like, "Yeah, but what have you taught me and all the other women that you've worked with over time? This is not the first speech you've ever given. You've given hundreds. So you're going to be okay. It's just slightly different content." Yeah. And it was that moment of, remember to breathe and notice what this is about.
That's such great advice. I do find that hard to believe, because I have seen you present to a large group of people, and I think you do amazing work. But it just goes to show that all of us have that something going on that people just assume we don't. And it's interesting, as you were talking, I'm thinking about, you know, that ability to stop and hear that internal voice. As you said, we often just process and go through really quickly, and, you know, we don't pause. And I think about some of the clients that we've worked with, and, you know, this whole imposter syndrome comes up. And I wonder, and I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on it, Maree, that if that voice is left unchecked, that it actually sort of spirals us into this misbelief that everybody else has got their shit together and we don't. That Maree's up there on stage, look at her, how lucky is she? She's amazing. She can speak to all these people. I could never do that, or I'd completely wreck it if it was me. She's so successful in her business, you know, all of this stuff. And that we sit in that room or watching or observing on social media, and we think that I'm not as good as that. I couldn't do that. And I think that, you know, what you were saying, it's just, we just don't pause. So let me flip it into a question. What are your thoughts on marrying this whole imposter syndrome, which is quite a buzzword out there, to this sense of worthiness, to this sense of mauling our mojo? How do they connect?
I react strongly to the term imposter syndrome. You may have seen me kind of shudder a bit there. I think it is so overused, and I know it's a thing, and I know it's a thing people believe that they have, and so I don't want to undermine that or discredit it. But I also think we've overused it, so it's become an unhelpful term. So that, put that box aside. How I think you're right. If we leave it unchecked, it becomes that self-belief. And I guess that my perspective on it would be, we have so many misconceptions about other people and about ourselves. In fact, I was running a group coaching session just last week, and one of the people in that session asked the most beautiful question, which was, what is the biggest misconception people may have about you? And I thought, oh, I'm storing that one in my toolkit. That is such a good question. And I wonder if in that moment of taking the 3 deep breaths and noticing what's going on, maybe people could ask themselves, what's a misconception I'm having about myself right now? What am I believing about myself that is not true? So that's the unchecked bit, isn't it? If we don't stop and give ourselves that insight, we continue to push those bad feelings away and soldier on, resilience. I've got to knock this out of the way and blow it out of the park. And whatever standards we've set for ourselves, if we don't meet those, then again, we're telling ourselves that negative story. I wonder if it's about, what's the misconception I have about myself right now? And then,
I love, oh, sorry.
and the extension of that is, what am I believing about other people that is highly likely to be untrue?
Oh, wow. There's such powerful, powerful questions. It's interesting what you say there in relation to, well, the power of pause is amazing. Asking ourselves high quality questions is always going to get a better response than asking ourselves a low quality question like, what's wrong with me? So what's the misconception that I'm believing about myself right now is a really high quality question, because it's asking us to look at something in a light that actually is much more, I guess, evidence-based or realistic, as opposed to the story we make up in our head. And I'm putting it sort of like, my mind's going into this context around, I wonder, where it's not stopped and checked, this misconception about the beliefs we have about ourselves. Sometimes it's comforting to say it's imposter syndrome because that's something we've heard of and that explains it away. So, okay, it's not great. I know the voices in my head are really negative, but oh, no, everyone has imposter syndrome, so that must be it. And then just keep moving. And there's almost an acceptance that, well, if it's something that everybody experiences, then I don't need to really worry about it because it's just what it happens. And so I love what you're saying there around, the whole putting it in the box. But I think the box is worth unpacking, because when we have a belief and that becomes an identity around, well, this is just who I am right now, that question you asked is so beautiful, because it actually is something you're making up. It's a misbelief.
It's a misbelief, and I think your point about just labeling it as imposter syndrome and letting it sit there is really powerful, because this is about challenging ourselves, isn't it? And let's face it, we live in a culture that does not reward us for having high self-esteem. We're surrounded by images and products and principles that tell us that, we're all a little bit broken and we need fixing. And so to reject that notion and to say, actually, I'm okay. And I'm quite good at these things, and I will be okay, even though this is something new. That is putting your head above the parapet and asking to be kicked in some ways, isn't it? So I think it requires, I think this is where the taking the 3 deep breaths and stopping is that opportunity to notice, I'm about to do something that is a bit challenging. I'm about to challenge me, and there may be some consequences with that, but it's who we take ourselves out into the world as. It's not what you do, it's who you be. How often have we heard that? But that's really what this worthiness and getting our mojo back under control is all about.
There's a couple of things in that. Wow, like really such an important conversation to be having. Two things that come up for me there is, one of them is looking at when you're experiencing that feeling of nervousness or fear, even the question there, and Lacey, what she asked you, what are you really nervous about? And that's something even personally lately I've been experiencing, having some speaking gigs. So it's really interesting hearing you say this. And I get the nerves. I'm like, right, how can I work with this instead of against it? What is it that I'm really nervous about? Is it the speaking? Is it the whatever it might be? And this is just an example event, but it comes across in so many areas of our life. And it is when you can ask yourself that question, what am I really nervous about or fearful? Or take the time to also flip that and look at, what is the gift in this? What am I learning in this? What do I need to hear? This is linked to also the comparison or the inner critic. Is there something that is constructive I can take away? But of course, it's like our human nature to just catastrophize everything. But there could be a little bit of gold in the middle if we take that time to pause. And the other thing I think is this being different, and it's scary to be different. And I'm just started, there's a book, I can't remember what it's called. I'll put it in the show notes just in case of its interest. So recently I was diagnosed with ADHD, one of the lost women over 40s. It's like, and so I'm doing this workbook. It's like a book to understand, particularly for women with ADHD. And there's journal questions and things. And in there it's asking questions around, do you remember what were your memories as a child of being different? What was different viewed like in your family, in your culture, and I'm thinking of, I just was doing this yesterday, lying in the hammock, and that's coming up for me as well when you're talking about, of course, when we put our head high, if no one else is doing it, we're getting ready to get knocked down. And how have these beliefs been ingrained in us since we were very, very young? From society, from our family specifically, there's that combination of generationally, and it's safety and it's survival and it's belonging in a pack and not being noticed, to be seen. Like there's an actual survival mechanism in this. So it's not that we ever want to totally remove it, because there is a safety in it. But again, it's understanding what's the healthy, resourceful version of that, and what's the bit that I need to let go of so I can step out and be different, whatever that particularly looks like.
That exercise, Nikki, reminds me of the role biography that I often do with my coaching clients, and that I know both of you have experienced through a workshop that I ran. And it's very, very similar process, isn't it, to get in touch with who was I as this child, and then at different points in my life, what role was I playing, and how did that express itself, and what meaning do I make of that for now? They're really useful reflections around, understanding self. And I don't think we can really effectively lead other people or run our businesses until we know who we are. That's the really critical element here, isn't it?
Yeah. And sorry, Ness, you go.
I was just going to say, that whole thing around know yourself, understand what's going on. And it's not just the self-awareness. Obviously, that's the beginning of it. And sometimes people need help with it. But the way that I see then that it gets applied in order to be able to thrive without burning out is when you understand what your needs are and where your mindset is at, it's easier to put boundaries in place that protect, your time, for example. It's easier to question that mindset and make some changes that are going to help you achieve the outcome that you want to achieve. It's all it's the baseline to be able to grow from. But if we choose all the time to ignore, and not stop and not pause and not get help if we need it, and not, take the time because we're too busy, then the reality of that is, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And so we just get more of the same, which obviously then, it's what we spoke about right at the beginning. It's the emotion that you push away that is always there, and it's going to pop up in a different way at a different time. It's probably the least convenient, and it's going to come back and bite you, because really what the cycle that needs to be broken there is to stop ignoring it. And I love it because it comes back to stop mauling that mojo. Do something that is going to empower you to be able to do what it is you want to do in life, to be able to stand up for yourself if that's what's needed, to be able to set boundaries in place if that's what needed, or just to get out there and make a bloody amazing difference in the world.
And I think just to be seen, just to allow yourself to be seen for who you truly are without all the masking and whatever it is that's not authentically you.
Yeah. Oh, yes. That's making my spine shiver.
The work that you do definitely makes my spine shiver. And I love that exercise and that workshop that you did. And this is great timing, because also I think the work that we do takes us down different paths, the work we do with ourselves as individuals. And we're talking about self-worth here. We're talking about self-love and acceptance. And I'm sure, I'd love your thoughts, Maree, but this is an ongoing piece, isn't it? It's not a one-stop shop. Oh, I did a workshop. Yay. Thanks, Maree. I've done my roles bio. I'm good. But what I'm realizing more and more and more is that as we get older and the work we do, it's all connected. So yes, yesterday doing that exercise, but then I've already got the seeds that have been planted, the amazing takeaways that I had some big insights and big aha moments when we worked together. It all then builds on each other and nurtures, and we have to keep doing it. What are your thoughts on that before I lead to the last question to wrap this conversation up?
Yeah, I think we are all our own life's work. And I think it's very easy to get caught up in the self-appreciation movement, if I might put it that way. Again, we're surrounded by messages around self-actualization and living authentically and reflect. And I, again, won't criticize that because that's my bread and butter and I love it. But we're not to do it at the expense of all the people around us. So I think for me, that really, it's about getting in touch with yourself, self-knowledge, self-leadership, self-regulation, because yes, we all have the right to be who we are, but that comes with responsibilities to other humans. So I think that the noise that's around us, particularly on social media, where I think I get a bit lost in translation with that is where we ignore the people around us. We ignore the fact that they also have some rights. So, this self-knowledge thing, it's a life of work. I'm going to be 60 in a couple of years, and I've got so much more to learn. And I know I've probably shared this quote with you a few times, but I have a running joke with my mum, who's 85, God bless her, beautiful socks. And I often say to Mum, when I was 18 or when I was 16, Mum, I knew everything and nobody wanted to know anything about what I knew. And now I'm 50, coming up 58, and I don't know anything, but people pay me for my wisdom. I love the play on that, because I think as we get older, we realize more and more how little of the world we know and how curiosity serves us so well.
Yeah, and that's the life stages as well, isn't it? There's just nothing else to add to that. That's so relatable and so true. And thank you so much for joining us today, Maree. I do feel like we're gonna have to get you back as well, because there's got to be a part 2 of this conversation. I already have so many questions in my head, but I will not take up too much more of your time, because I know that we always promise those bite-sized pieces. Please, listeners, share with us, what have you loved from this conversation? Reach out to us. Where can our listeners follow you, Maree? Because it's definitely worth friendly stalking you.
People can stalk me. No, please don't.
Friendly stalking. You got to include that word in there. Boundaries.
So people can find me on Instagram at Maree McPherson, LinkedIn at Maree McPherson. They'll find me Facebook, Maree McPherson Consulting. I think I come up under that on Facebook. And of course, my wonderful website is the best place to go. So, of course, that's mareemcpherson.com.au. MareeMcPherson.com will get you there as well. And there's a whole lot of information there about my programs, my books, the audiobook version of Worthy for people who would prefer to listen is available on all platforms. So I'm not difficult to find if your listeners would like to hear more.
Amazing.
Fabulous.
And we'll, of course, put all of that in the show notes as well. So we love to wrap up the end of the episode. Ness, did you have something else that you wanted to jump in?
No, just how much I've loved our conversation today. Thank you, Maree, and definitely worthy of getting hold of Worthy, because it's a fabulous book.
Worthy of, love that. Again, can't add anything to that. So we have covered off a fair bit in this jam-packed 25 minutes. We've talked about the importance of stopping and breathing, the pause, which actually is a common theme in this podcast. Surprise, not surprise. Listen, the importance of the emotions and feelings like comparisonitis, but inviting the inner critic or these potentially negative feelings and thoughts in for a cuppa. I mean, hello, I love that reframe. And then see you later. What's not serving me? There is a lot looking at what does this fear mean, uncovering our story, our roles, the beliefs that we've created. If we were to give our listeners, our beautiful listeners and watchers, one actionable action in the next 24 hours that I think can just help them move towards, step towards that self-acceptance, self-worth, self-love, this piece around being able to be who we are, but in an authentic is bandied around a lot. It is with respect and love to the people around us, whilst knowing our boundaries of who to and not to include in that. But if there was one thing that people can do in 24 hours to move towards that, what would that be?
Oh, this is such a good question. And the one thing is really tricky for me. But I've got a suggestion. I reckon there's 2 questions that people can practice asking themselves on top of the ones we've already talked about. So 2 questions to practice asking yourself when you're in a stage of doubt. One is, if I don't do what I'm about to do, what things will I regret? And the second question is, if I do this, what things will I thank myself for in 5 years' time? I'll repeat them. I'll repeat them for your listeners. So practice these 2 questions. If you're about to embark on something and you're feeling anxious about it, or your mojo is dying off, ask yourself these questions. If I don't do this now, what things will I regret? And if I do this, what things will I thank myself for in 5 years' time?
Love that so much. They're great questions. I'm sitting here going, oh, I'm going to write them down. I'm going to practice saying them. That's something really tangible. Thank you so much, Maree. You've shared absolute gold, and I've really enjoyed our chat today. So yeah, we're going to have to come back next year for another conversation. Thank you, listeners. And we'll be in your ears again in a week. Bye.
See you later.
Thanks for having me.